Picture the exact moment a lottery ticket gets scanned and the numbers match. Champagne, tears, disbelief. Now picture that same person 18 months later, and here's the part nobody shows you. Researchers tracked major lottery winners against a control group and found something almost impossible to believe. The winners weren't any happier than people who'd never won a thing. Some were even a little less satisfied with everyday life. If a life-changing windfall can't move the needle, then maybe the entire story sold about wealth is missing something huge. So here's the promise for the next few minutes. This isn't another video about hustle culture or get-rich-quick fantasies. This is about what actually happens inside the mind, inside the bank account, inside the relationships and the sense of identity of someone who builds real wealth. The psychology, the data, the quiet, unglamorous truth. Because once the finish line myth gets busted, everything about the journey starts to make a lot more sense. Start with the biggest lie of all. The idea that there's a single moment where everything clicks into place. The first million, the paid-off mortgage, the day the numbers finally look enough. Most people imagine that moment like crossing a finish line, fireworks included. But ask anyone who's actually reached a big financial milestone what it felt like, and the answer is almost always the same. Quiet, ordinary, life just continues. That 1978 study on lottery winners wasn't a fluke either. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation. Humans have a baseline level of satisfaction, and no matter how dramatically circumstances shift, people drift back toward that baseline within months. Income has climbed dramatically across entire generations, yet broad measures of well-being have barely moved. The takeaway is uncomfortable but important. The feeling being chased isn't waiting at the destination. It has to be built along the way, or it won't show up at all. Now, here's where the myth gets even weirder. Everyone assumes the wealthy live like something out of a luxury reel. Supercars, watches, marble kitchens. But decades of research into actual millionaires found a completely different story. One of the most detailed studies ever done on the wealthy found the median self-made millionaire drives a modest, older vehicle, wears a fairly inexpensive watch, and lives in a perfectly ordinary house in a perfectly ordinary suburb. Not because they can't afford more, because they've built a habit of spending well below what they earn year after year after year. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting. It's a grocery list, a budget spreadsheet, and the same unremarkable Tuesday routine repeated for decades. The unsexy truth is this. The process that actually builds wealth looks almost nothing like the process shown on social media. It looks boring. Boring, repeated correctly, compounds. Which leads straight into the part almost everyone gives up on, the beginning. Compounding has a strange personality. In the early years, it feels like nothing is happening. Someone puts money into shares or a super fund, checks the balance a year later, and feels almost insulted by how small the growth looks. But compounding isn't linear, it's exponential, and exponential curves are famously deceptive at the start. Picture two savers, each contributing steadily for 30 years at a reasonable long-term market return. In the first decade, the growth is barely noticeable, mostly just the contributions themselves. In the final decade, the account can grow by more in a single year than the entire balance was worth after year one. The slow grind at the start isn't a warning sign that something's wrong. It's exactly what the math is supposed to look like before momentum kicks in. Most people quit in the boring middle, right before the curve finally bends upward. Here's a misconception that trips up even high-income earners. More money coming in does not automatically mean more wealth going out the other side. Picture two people. Person A earns a solid average income and consistently invests a fixed percentage of it every single month, decade after decade. Person B earns triple that income, but lifestyle expands right alongside it. Bigger car, bigger house, bigger everything. so almost nothing is left over to invest. 10 years on, person A has built a meaningfully larger net worth than person B, despite earning far less. Even trained investors fall into a version of this trap. One well-known long-running study on fund investors found that the average person's actual investment returns lagged the underlying fund's returns by more than a full percentage point a year, purely because of poorly timed buying and selling, panic selling on the way down, chasing hype on the way up. Over a decade, that gap alone erased close to 15% of the total return investors could have capped. The lesson isn't earn more. It's protect the gap between what comes in and what goes out, and don't sabotage the compounding with impatience. Now for the part almost nobody warns anyone about. Reaching a financial milestone doesn't erase anxiety. It usually just swaps one set of worries for another. The assumption is always, once the numbers look right, the stress disappears. In practice, income and well-being rise together only to a certain point. Beyond that threshold, more income stops buying more daily contentment. What replaces the old money stress isn't peace either. It's often new complexity. Tax questions get more complicated. Protecting what's been built becomes its own project. Family dynamics can shift once relatives find out there's money in the picture. None of this means wealth isn't worth pursuing. It means the goalposts move, they don't disappear. And expecting total, permanent relief sets almost everyone up for disappointment. So if wealth doesn't erase problems and the process is genuinely boring, what actually separates the people who get there from the people who don't? More often than raw ambition or a brilliant investment pick, it comes down to simply not sabotaging the plan. The behavior gap research mentioned earlier shows this clearly. It's rarely one catastrophic decision that derails someone financially. It's the accumulation of small, repeated mistakes, panic selling during a downturn, taking on high-interest debt to fund a lifestyle upgrade, abandoning a savings plan the moment something shinier shows up, or comparing progress to a neighbor's highlight reel instead of a personal baseline. Avoiding those self-inflicted wounds does more for long-term outcomes than almost any single big win ever could. Staying the course quietly and consistently is one of the most underrated skills in personal finance. So what does all of this actually mean to do starting now? First, automate the boring part. Set up a recurring transfer into savings or investments the same day income lands before there's a chance to spend it. Second, pick an investment approach built for decades, not headlines, and leave it alone through the noisy middle years when nothing seems to be happening. Third, track spending against income rather than against a dream lifestyle. Protecting the gap matters more than the size of the paycheck. Fourth, build a plan for the emotional side too. Downturns will happen, and having a written strategy in advance makes it far less tempting to panic sell into a loss. Fifth, revisit goals every year because new problems will show up at every new level, and that's normal, not a sign anything's broken. And finally, measure progress against personal numbers from a year ago, not against someone else's highlight reel. Comparison is where most of the unnecessary financial stress actually comes from. None of this makes the goal any less worth chasing. It just means the goal was never a single golden finish line to sprint toward. Real financial security looks a lot more like Miss T from that famous Millionaire study. Modest home, older car, $18 haircut, and remarkably, one of the highest satisfaction scores in the entire survey. Not because the number in the account was flashy, but because the habits, the patience, and the identity behind the number were solid. That's the version of making it that actually holds up over time. Quiet, boring, and built one deliberate decision at a time. If this reframed the whole idea of wealth, drop a comment with the one habit going in the calendar this week. Hit like if the boring truth version landed harder than the highlight reel ever did. Subscribe for more of this, and share it with the one person who needs to hear that the process is supposed to feel slow at the start.